So let's look at some of the challenges of serverless. So the first one, the one that tends to pop up the most, is vendor dependency. And if you're going to develop something that is purely serverless, and if you really want to get the most efficiency and cost effectiveness out of it, you're going to have to use many of the cloud providers' proprietary services. And these are not necessarily compatible with other cloud providers. So you will become very dependent on your cloud provider of choice. Now, whether or not this is a problem, it really depends on the organization policy. If the organization has a policy that says, okay, everything that we develop must run on 2 cloud providers, then serverless just might not be the best option for you. Things like Kubernetes and containers would be better suited for that kind of requirement. If you had to achieve that with serverless, you would effectively end up writing 2 different applications, one for the one cloud provider and another for the other. And then you could switch over between the 2. Now, what is common is having a main or a core, or the main part of the application running on a cloud provider, often Amazon Web Services, but you might utilize the services of another cloud provider because maybe they have something that is unique or does a certain thing that you really need. So it's very common to actually see the bulk of the backend running on Amazon, but then using some of the AI services on Google, for example. So another challenge, and this is for me, this is really the most, the real challenge of serverless, is around latency. So latency is the delay that it takes before you get a response from a backend. And part of that delay will be just the computational overhead, so it actually doing something. And part of that delay will just be the actual latency, which is the time it needs to achieve something. And you want this as little as possible. When this goes into higher numbers, it just becomes very bad user experience, like they're waiting for things to happen. Now, if everything is running in a single code base on a single server, the communication or the steps that happen between that, as you can imagine, will be very quick because it's all within that. It's probably all running in memory. So it'll be extremely fast. You have very minimal latency. Your main latency is going to be from the user to the server and then from the server back to the user. Whereas with serverless, and you have microservice architecture, the request is going to come into first service, it's going to be passed to your microservice, which is going to talk to maybe other services and do certain things. There might even be another microservice behind that. So you can see that there's many different components now in this solution, and each step that it takes adds a little bit more latency to it. Now, each step in itself is not that much latency, but it adds up. And so we mitigate this by really thinking about how we design these type of interactions. How do we minimize the number of steps that a user has to wait for? So if a certain process just needs a lot of steps, that's fine, but can we handle that in the background instead of having the user wait for that? This is called asynchronous requests. It means the user will hand off what needs to be done. We'll tell them, okay, we've received your request, we're going to go and do that, and we'll come back to you when it's done. So another challenge is around talent, and this is something we'll cover in a bit more in depth later. But serverless has not been around that long, 6 years actually at the moment. So anybody with serverless experience has max 6 years of experience with that. Now, things like good programming techniques and microservices have been around obviously much longer. But if you're looking for that in-depth serverless experience, it's going to be max 6 years. And they know that. We know that. We have this serverless experience. There's not many of us out there. And because of that, we know that we can charge a premium for organizations that want to pursue serverless. And so this becomes it becomes challenging to find this talent. And this talent tends to be more expensive than the other talent that is available. So one way to offset this is just to hire good developers, good people, good team members that just know whatever their craft is, that they're very good at that, and then train them to become more serverless and get more exposure to serverless and serverless projects. And maybe bring in one person or 2 people that have experience with that serverless just to get them on the right path. The next challenge I want to cover is about responsibility. And we've talked about this already. Serverless, you place a lot of the responsibility onto the cloud provider. They're responsible for much more of it compared to server-based. Now, giving away this responsibility also means giving away much of the controls and the flexibility that you have over those underlying services. With serverless microservices, you don't have access to the operating system. If you or the organization or perhaps regulatory have certain requirements about specific security setups or configurations, you might not be able to do that in serverless. So it really depends on the organization and the requirements. Generally, the more responsibility that goes to the cloud provider, the less flexibility and the less control you're going to have over those services.